And this just shows how the first very simple level can get generated. And here we pull up the geometry, make sure all the gaps are closed and everything's textures seen correctly. So get down, check out specular values with the lighting. So it's a good way to preview it before you jump into the game. And we can see how much variety we're actually getting out of our rule set. Maybe cycle through a couple more random seeds. And pretty much on top of this even, we get all the cars and monsters thrown at the streets. So this is just the basic rough shell of a level, as it turns out. But it gives us a lot of variety for the city level. And the cities themselves actually have built the pieces such that the sidewalks could see directly with each other. So we can eliminate the road and make a nice tight alley situation, have it go from alley to street to alley, and then they could ring around the park. So we use the same basic building pieces. We can create a far different feel and flow to each level type that we want. This is what those look like in Max. So in the Max file, in our effort to keep as much as possible in a known tool that we can transform, move vertices and policy and texture, do all those things that we didn't want to have to write a new tool to do. We did it in here. So for rooms, we said, okay, what's a simple way to do it? We just want a rule set. So we want to start with video as well. We have rule 1, 2, 3, 4. And each of those, it's based off naming conventions. So we say, okay, that little red square down on the far left is how the level starts. So it's okay, pick this room. And then next rule, when I see that room, replace it with any of these groups of rooms, which is the 8 or 10 stringing up to the top. And then we rerun that rule. So I can run this rule 5 times, 6 times, 10 times. And it will string 6, 10, whatever those together in a row, and then follow up to the second one, interject a different type of sets of rooms, and repeat that process and get to the end and put the exit to the level. And this way, this is how we can, with data through spreadsheets, change how big the level is. Because this could be as short as 5 rooms, or it could be as long as a million if we want a level that took you a year to play through. But it's not going to go. Let's show a little clip. I'm going to zoom in on some of the debug textures and the individual room itself. And this all is only for the artist benefit, the level designer, to look at and read and say, okay, this is where the origin is. That's on the left. And the little red square on the right is the origin for the group. So that when a larger group of rooms comes in, it knows where to put itself in space relative to the rooms that preceded. And so each of those icons represents a certain building type, a certain set of visible geometry and collision. So this is pretty much just right there. So we see we got rule R, and then the next one's just named replace R, and then replace R with 1. And so this way we didn't have to manually, because you just copy and paste. And the auto rename feature in Max is very useful for us. And I didn't do a clip of that, but if you're familiar with this, a way to just select the whole group, and you can do prefix, suffix, and base name. So it made a lot easier that because you get 20 building types and say, okay, I need building A, B, C, D, E, and just auto name it all. It's pretty cool. So here the group has just individual meshes, and that right there says building F. And so when it looks for what to place there in the engine, it just looks for building F, building C, and then there's subvariants of that. So building F has building FA, FB, FC, FD, and so on. To give it, it's either a collapsed caved-in building, or it's a flat facade, or stone, or brick, or whatever. Probably get the joke of that. Anyway, back out of this one. It's pretty much just all repeating. Well, that's an exit word. A special icon around saying, okay, this is where you're going to leave the level, or where you enter the level. And even that'll change. That's where these options here, sometimes when you enter this city level, you'll come out inside the building, or from the basement, or just straight out of the street, like the first train. So even when you get the same type of level, the way you go into that level changes. It just really opens up possible combinations of how the world flows. And that's just how we export it. Just select them all together. No special extra groups or anything. Just goes into the Granny exporter TR2 file, and then our code just looks at what the group names are and what the subnames are. So a lot of it's just naming convention driven. Makes it really easy for the artists. You don't have to look up too many codes. So this is what a typical spreadsheet looks like. And there's 5 pages of this in the same spreadsheet, and it controls everything from how many times the room shows up to what the names of the levels are to what the random choices are per level, whether it's a city or a sewer or sewer type B. Can't really see too much detail on there, but the columns with the numbers in them are what tells you how many times to place each rule. So I want to run rule or 6 times because I want it to have 6 runs, or 6 to 8 times, vary it. So that's the data-driven aspect. And then other spreadsheets say, okay, for Covent Garden Market, we want to have a choice of environment types. Sometimes we want it dark, sometimes we want it sunny, sometimes we want acid rain. Who knows? And if we could pair those things off as much or as little as we like. We ended up, after all this trial and error, getting to the point where the game had all the levels spec'd out. But we hadn't broken the levels down into acts, per se. And this was kind of a last-minute thing. So, the game feels like it's too random, ironically. How much we love random. But what happened was, you'd go through and you'd never know whether you're going to go to a sewer or a city or a park. And the entire game almost got consistent as a whole. So for 40 hours, you never knew what was coming. So we ended up going back, changing the spreadsheets around, and focusing Act 1 on tunnels and streets, and then Act 2 on sewers and parks. And then within that, there's subdivisions, so there's still plenty of randomness, so you didn't know what you're getting. You might get a sewer or a park. But then we themed the kind of color schemes of the environments to match so that you really felt this progression. And that was one of those benefits of being so iterative in our design and having the flexibility to go back and do that last minute. That was literally the last month of development, which normally there's no way you could make that big of a radical change in the game development. And then same with rebuilding rooms. So we had to rebuild a room. It's just one piece of a small level. It's not, you don't have to rebuild the entire level, re-export, relight. You just change, you just fix in one room. So breaking it down into chunks like that really makes it good. And this just basically goes over how we ended up with Max. I was very flexible. We just looked in and said, like, what can it do? What kind of data can we get out of it? I personally like it because it's what I've used for a long time, and I've totally customized all the keys to do exactly what I want. I don't have to fiddle with, using the mouse to go find how to rotate the camera and get a front view or a top view. I like using one really big viewport and then just moving around very quickly. Most people look at how I work and think I'm kind of crazy, but I look at other people work. How can you work so slow? It's how do you menu-driven stuff just drives me nuts. So being able to customize the UI, I think, a great thing. And so when we started, we didn't have the resources to go out and do custom tools and all that, so we just figured out how to make use of what we had. So I tend to organize my scenes where I just do all the buildings in the same file so that I can make sure everything scenes up properly. And using group and ungroup and hide and unhide and visibility settings. I don't get too crazy with layers and things like that in Max because I'm just real comfortable with very quickly hiding and unhiding and freezing things. I can keep it all in there. Some of my artists will go through and do a separate file for each one, and that works too because it's all flexible, and as long as the pipeline gets the same result out of it, it's all good. So I really dig the flexibility. So here's a very simplistic flow chart of what a room is. Like I explained before, you have visible meshes. And those we broke down. We couldn't have too many because originally we were pre-rendering lighting for as much as we could. And we still do for the indoor stuff so that we can get some really nice soft shadows and hot spots and these things. And we didn't want the overhead of a 100% real-time lighting engine. So we pre-bake it. We just use a tool in Max to render texture. You render out a light map and it auto unwraps it all. So it's a pretty simple thing to do. But when you do that, you end up with another file. It's the light map file. And so if we had 50 meshes in each room, we end up with 50 extra textures and all that. So we basically just said, okay, well, let's do 2, 3, 4 different meshes to simulate whichever pieces of the room. And for myself, I would separate out the ground, the walls, and then the little clutter things. Because when you go to unwrap geometry, the more complicated is obviously the smaller little bits get. If you have a really huge facade, and it's mixed in with all the drain pipes and